The rain hammered against the dilapidated mill with such fury that Delia Hayes was certain this would be the night the roof finally gave way. Every raindrop sounded like a death knell for the ancient structure she now called home. Each thunderclap a reminder of how completely alone she was in this unforgiving corner of Montana territory. 1876. Clutching a dented tin bucket beneath the worst of the leaks, Delia brushed a strand of copper hair from her face and glanced up at the ceiling where water seeped through in a dozen different places. 6 months a widow, and here she was, barely surviving in an abandoned gristmill miles from the nearest town of Pine Ridge. The life insurance money from her husband Thomas's mining accident had been just enough to secure this property her last hope for independence in a world that offered few options to a woman alone. Not much of a refuge now, is it? She muttered to herself, moving another bucket into position as a new leak sprouted. The storm had been raging for hours, turning the dusty road into a river of mud and forcing Delia to abandon any hope of sleep. Instead, she huddled near her small stove, wrapped in a patchwork quilt, listening to the wind howl through the cracks in the walls. This mill had once been the lifeblood of the valley before the railroad had come through and made the smaller settlements obsolete. Now it stood as a lonely sentinel on the banks of Clearwater Creek, its massive water wheel long since broken, its grinding stones silent. A particularly violent gust of wind tore at the building, and Delia flinched as she heard something heavy crash outside. She wondered if it was another section of the mill's exterior siding giving way. Thomas would have known how to fix it. Thomas would have. But Thomas was gone, buried in the rocky soil of a mining camp cemetery, leaving her to make her own way. She'd sold nearly everything they'd owned to purchase this property, convinced she could turn it into something sustainable, perhaps a way station for travelers, or even restore it to a working mill if she could save enough for repairs. Now, as water dripped steadily through her ceiling, that dream seemed as substantial as morning mist. The thunder boomed directly overhead, and Delia nearly jumped out of her skin when something pounded on her door, louder even than the storm. Her heart leapt to her throat. No one came to the old mill, especially not in weather like this. She grabbed her husband's old shotgun from beside the door, the one possession she'd refused to sell, and called out, "Who's there?" Her voice sounded steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "Madam, I don't mean to disturb you, but my horse has gone lame and I'm caught in this downpour." The voice belonged to a man, deep and clear even through the howling wind. "I saw your light. Might I take shelter in your barn till morning?" Delia hesitated. The barn, such as it was, stood 50 yards from the main building and leaked worse than the mill itself. Even a stranger didn't deserve to be left out in such conditions, but caution made her wary. "There's no barn fit for man nor beast," she called back. "Just the old mill house." A pause. "Then perhaps your porch. I won't trouble you further." Something in his voice, a note of honest exhaustion, made her decision. "Wait there," she said, setting the shotgun within easy reach before unbolting the door. When she pulled it open, the wind nearly yanked it from her grasp. Standing on her threshold was a tall figure, water streaming from the brim of his hat and the shoulders of his duster. He held the reins of a magnificent buckskin horse that looked nearly as miserable as its rider. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. His face emerged from the shadows weathered by sun and wind, stubbled with several days' growth of beard, but with eyes that struck her immediately, clear blue, direct and weary. "You'd better come in," she said, stepping back, "and bring your horse around to the lean-to on the east side. It's not much, but it'll keep the worst of the rain off." "I'm obliged," he said, relief evident in his voice. "The name's Owen Blackwood." "Delia Hayes," she replied, watching as he led his horse away, disappearing into the rain-drenched darkness. When he returned minutes later, he was even more soaked than before, water pooling around his boots as he stood awkwardly in her doorway. "Take off that wet coat," she instructed, businesslike, "and your boots." I don't have much, but I can offer you dry clothes that belonged to my late husband. You look to be about his size. Owen hesitated only briefly before complying, peeling off his sodden duster and hat. Beneath, he wore a faded blue shirt and denim pants, both plastered to his lean frame. His hair, revealed when he removed his hat, was the color of dark honey, curling slightly from the dampness. "Thank you kindly, Mrs. Hayes," he said, his gaze sweeping the interior of the mill. She saw him taking in the scattered buckets, the makeshift living space she'd created in what had once been the mill office, the general state of disrepair. "It's not much," she said defensively, crossing to a trunk where she kept Thomas's clothes, "but it's mine." "It's a fine place," he replied, surprising her. "Good bones, built to last." She handed him a stack of clothing, a faded red flannel shirt, woolen trousers, thick socks. "You can change behind that screen," she said, indicating a painted rice paper folding screen that had been among the few luxuries she'd brought from her previous life. While he changed, Delia busied herself making coffee on the small stove, trying not to think about the fact that a man was in her home for the first time since Thomas's death. When Owen emerged, wearing her husband's clothes that indeed fit him reasonably well, she had 2 steaming cups ready. "You're very kind, Mrs. Hayes," he said, accepting the cup gratefully. Mrs. Hayes was my mother-in-law. "I'm just Delia," she replied, then wondered why she'd offered that familiarity to a complete stranger. Owen nodded, sipping the coffee. "This storm caught me by surprise. I was heading to Pine Ridge, but the trail turned into a river before I could make it to town." "You're lucky you found the mill," Delia said. "There's nothing else for miles around." A tremendous crack of thunder shook the building, and suddenly water began pouring through a new breach in the ceiling, splashing directly onto her bed. Delia cursed under her breath, rushing to move her bedding before it was soaked through. Owen set down his cup and moved to help her, dragging the mattress away from the deluge. "Been meaning to fix that roof, have you?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice despite the situation. Delia shot him a look. "Among 100 other things, I haven't quite mastered climbing up there with a hammer and nails while also keeping this place from falling down around my ears." The rain continued to find new entry points, and soon they were moving buckets and pans around like pieces on a chessboard, trying to catch the worst leaks. "This is a losing battle tonight," Owen observed, watching as water streamed down one wall. "But I could help you with that roof come morning." Delia stopped in the middle of wringing out a sodden towel. "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask, I offered," he said simply. "Least I can do for the shelter." Before she could respond, a section of plaster crashed down from above, narrowly missing them both. Owen instinctively moved toward her, as if to shield her from danger. Delia looked up at the gaping hole now visible in her ceiling, showing the underside of the roof timbers. "I suppose I'd be a fool to refuse," she said finally. They spent the remainder of the night in an awkward vigil, Delia dozing fitfully in a chair while Owen sat on the floor near the stove, his back against the wall. She'd offered him her bed, now positioned in the driest corner of the room, but he had firmly refused. The storm finally began to abate as dawn broke, the torrential downpour giving way to a steady drizzle. When Delia awoke fully, she found Owen already awake, studying the ceiling with a critical eye. "Your roof's in bad shape," he said without preamble, "but not beyond saving. The main beam is solid, it's just the shingles and some of the supporting timbers that need replacing." Delia blinked sleep from her eyes. "You can tell all that from down here." A smile touched his lips, transforming his weathered face. "Been building and fixing things since I was tall enough to hold a hammer. My father was a carpenter before he tried his hand at ranching." "And what are you?" she asked, suddenly curious about this man who had appeared like an apparition in the storm. "A bit of everything, I suppose," he replied, his gaze turning distant. "Cowhand tracker guide. I do odd jobs when money gets tight." Was heading to Pine Ridge to meet a cattle buyer who needs help moving a herd north. Delia nodded, rising to stoke the fire in the stove. I have some cornmeal for breakfast. It's not much, but it sounds fine, Owen interrupted gently. And afterward, if you've got tools, I'll see what I can do about that roof while the rain's holding off. True to his word, after a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with the last of her molasses, Owen set about examining the exterior of the mill. Delia followed him outside, watching as he circled the building with a critical eye. There, he pointed to the southwest corner, where several wooden shingles had been torn away completely. That's your worst spot, but there's damage all around. When was the last time this roof saw any work? I've no idea, Delia admitted. The mill was abandoned for years before I bought it. The previous owner was an elderly man who moved to California to live with his daughter. Owen nodded thoughtfully. I'll need lumber and nails. You have any on the property? Delia led him to a small shed attached to the rear of the mill. Inside were her husband's tools and a modest supply of building materials she'd purchased with the last of her money, hoping to eventually make repairs herself. Thomas was teaching me basic carpentry before. She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. Before the accident, I've been meaning to start on the repairs, but it's been overwhelming on my own. Owen examined the tools and lumber with approval. This is a good start, not enough to fix everything, but we can shore up the worst spots. Without waiting for her response, he began gathering what he needed: hammer, nails, a handsaw, and several planks of pine. His efficiency spoke of a man accustomed to tackling problems head-on. Delia watched him work for a moment, uncertain what to do with herself. I should help, she said finally. Tell me what you need me to do. Owen paused, seeming surprised by her offer. Can you handle these tools? I'm not helpless, she replied, a touch of irritation in her voice. I've been surviving here alone for months. A smile touched his eyes. Never said you were helpless, Mrs. Delia. Just asking what you know. For the next several hours, they worked together under a sky that threatened more rain but held back its deluge. Owen climbed onto the roof with surprising agility, while Delia handed up tools and materials from a ladder propped against the mill's stone foundation. The work was harder than she'd anticipated, her muscles protesting as the day wore on, but there was satisfaction in seeing tangible progress. By mid-afternoon, Owen had replaced the worst of the damaged shingles and reinforced several weak spots in the roof structure. Sweat darkened his borrowed shirt despite the cool spring air, and Delia found herself noticing the way his shoulders moved beneath the fabric, the careful precision of his hands as they hammered nails. That should hold for now, he said finally, climbing down the ladder. It's not permanent, but it'll keep the worst of the water out until you can get a proper repair done. Delia gazed up at the roof, emotion suddenly thick in her throat. Such a simple thing, a roof that didn't leak yet. It felt like the first piece of solid ground she'd found since Thomas died. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate for the relief she felt. I insist on paying you something for your work. Owen shook his head. Not necessary. Like I said, least I could do for the shelter. He glanced at his horse, now grazing contentedly in the patchy grass near the mill. Looks like Samson's leg is better too. A night's rest was all he needed. Delia realized with a start that he was preparing to leave. Of course he would go. He had business in Pine Ridge, a life that had intersected with hers only by chance. At least stay for a meal before you go, she said, surprising herself with the invitation. I have some beans I can cook up, and I baked bread yesterday. Owen hesitated, then nodded. That'd be welcome, thank you. As Delia prepared their simple meal, she found herself stealing glances at her unexpected guest. He moved about her space with a careful respect for her belongings, examining the mill's mechanism with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about how the grindstones had worked when the mill was operational. The water wheel's broken in 2 places, he observed, looking out the window at the massive wooden wheel that had once harnessed the creek's power. But the axle seemed solid. With the right materials, it could work again. Do you think so? Delia asked, hope flaring briefly. I've wondered if I could get the mill running again. There are farms in the valley that might use it. It wouldn't be easy, Owen cautioned, but it's possible. The creek has good flow, even now after winter. They ate their meal at Delia's small table, the conversation flowing more easily than she would have expected with a stranger. Owen told her of his travels throughout the territory, of the 2 years he'd spent working a silver claim that had yielded just enough to keep him searching but never enough to make him rich. And what brought you to this abandoned mill? He asked finally, his blue eyes studying her with genuine curiosity. Delia set down her fork, considering how much to share. My husband died in a mining accident last fall, she said finally. The company paid a settlement, not much, but enough that I had choices. I could have gone back east to my sister or taken a room in town and looked for work as a seamstress or a teacher. But you chose this instead, Owen said, gesturing to the mill around them. I chose independence, Delia corrected. Thomas and I came west because we wanted to build something of our own when he died. She swallowed hard. Everyone expected me to give up that dream, go back to being someone's sister or someone's employee. This mill was for sale at a price I could afford. It's mine, no one can take it from me. Owen nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression. It's a brave choice, or a foolish one, Delia sighed, glancing at the buckets still positioned around the room. Some days I'm not sure which. Brave and foolish often look similar from the outside, Owen replied with a slight smile. But for what it's worth, I think you've got a real chance here. The location's good, close enough to town for supplies, but with enough land to be self-sufficient. The building's solid despite the roof, and that creek's a resource many would envy. His words warmed something in Delia that had been cold for months, the ember of her determination, nearly extinguished by isolation and hardship. After they finished eating, Owen reluctantly announced it was time for him to continue to Pine Ridge. He changed back into his own clothes, now dry after hanging near the stove, and Delia found herself watching the careful way he folded Thomas's borrowed garments. Keep them, she said impulsively. Thomas would have wanted them to be useful to someone. Owen looked up, surprise evident on his face. That's generous of you. Are you certain? Delia nodded. They suit you, and it seems fitting after all your help. He accepted the clothes with a nod of thanks, packing them carefully in his saddlebags. Outside, the clouds had finally broken, revealing patches of blue sky. The world seemed washed clean by the storm, the grass greener, the air fresher. If you're ever passing through again, Delia said as Owen mounted his horse, you're welcome to stop by. I make a decent cup of coffee. I'll remember that, he replied, settling into the saddle. He tipped his hat to her. Take care of yourself, Delia Hayes. She watched him ride away, following the muddy track that eventually connected to the main road to Pine Ridge. Only when he had disappeared around the bend did she realize how quiet the mill seemed now, how much emptier. Shaking off the feeling, Delia returned inside to survey the work they'd accomplished. The roof was far from perfect, but as a light rain began to fall again, she moved about the room checking for leaks. To her delight, the worst spots were now dry. Only 2 small drips remained, easily caught in a single bucket. Well, Thomas, she said aloud to the empty room, a habit she'd developed in the months of solitude, I think things might be looking up. The following days fell into a familiar rhythm as Delia resumed her solitary routine. She tended her small vegetable garden, began preparations for the chickens she hoped to acquire soon, and took stock of the repairs still needed. The list was daunting, but somehow less overwhelming after Owen's visit. He had shown her what was possible with determination and the right skills. A week after the storm, Delia hitched her mule to the small wagon Thomas had built and made the journey into Pine Ridge for supplies. The town was barely more than a wide spot in the road, a general store, a saloon, a smithy, and a handful of other businesses strung along a single dusty street. Still, It represented her nearest contact with civilization, a trip she made as infrequently as possible to conserve her dwindling funds. As she loaded sacks of flour and beans into her wagon, a familiar figure emerged from the saloon across the street. Owen spotted her at almost the same moment, raising a hand in greeting before crossing to where she stood. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, the formality at odds with the warmth in his voice. "How's that roof holding up? Still dry," she replied, surprised by how pleased she was to see him. "I thought you'd be gone by now, moved on with your cattle buyer." Owen leaned against her wagon. Deal fell through. The buyer wanted to pay half what the job was worth. He shrugged philosophically. "It happens. I've picked up some work at the livery instead, helping the blacksmith. He's got more business than his hands can handle." Delia nodded, trying not to show her interest in this news. "Will you stay in Pine Ridge long? A few weeks at least," Owen replied. "Say, I was thinking about your mill. That water wheel needs specialized work the kind Harlan at the smithy knows how to do. If you're interested, I could talk to him about what it would take to repair it." Delia hesitated. The offer was tempting, but pride made her wary of accepting more help. "I couldn't afford to hire a blacksmith right now," she admitted. "Maybe in a few months if my garden produces well and I can sell some preserves." "No harm in asking what it would cost," Owen said reasonably. "Knowledge doesn't empty your pocketbook." Put that way, Delia couldn't argue. "I suppose you're right. I'm heading back to the smithy now. Why don't you come along, talk to Harlan yourself?" Before she quite knew how it happened, Delia found herself walking beside Owen toward the blacksmith shop at the edge of town, the rhythmic clanging of hammer on metal growing louder as they approached. Inside, the heat was intense, the air thick with smoke and the smell of hot iron. Harlan Murphy was a mountain of a man with forearms like tree trunks and a surprisingly gentle manner. He listened intently as Delia described the mill's water wheel, occasionally interrupting with technical questions about dimensions and materials. "It's an ambitious project," he said finally, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag, "but not impossible. I'd need to see it myself to give you a proper estimate." "Harlan's sister lives out your way," Owen interjected, "near the Patterson place. He visits her Sundays." "Perhaps he could stop by the mill on his way back to town," the blacksmith nodded. "I could do that. This coming Sunday, if it suits you, Mrs. Hayes." Delia agreed, though the prospect of having her mill assessed made her stomach tighten with anxiety. What if the repairs were far beyond anything she could ever afford? Better to know than to hold on to false hope, she told herself firmly. As they left the smithy, Owen fell into step beside her. "I hope you don't mind me arranging that," he said, sounding uncharacteristically uncertain. "I just thought it was thoughtful," Delia interrupted. "Thank you. I might not be able to act on his assessment right away, but as you said, knowledge is valuable." They reached her wagon, and Owen helped her climb onto the wooden seat. As she gathered the reins, he looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "If you wouldn't mind the company," he said, "I could ride out with Harlan on Sunday. There are a few other repairs I noticed that might need attention before the weather turns again." Delia felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest, anticipation, perhaps, or simple gratitude for human connection after so much solitude. "I would welcome the company," she said honestly, "and I'll have dinner ready for you both as thanks for the consultation." Owen's smile brightened his weathered face. "We'll look forward to it." As Delia drove her wagon out of Pine Ridge, she found herself humming a tune she hadn't thought of in months, a cheerful fiddle song that Thomas had loved. The day seemed brighter somehow, the burden of her solitary existence just a fraction lighter. Sunday dawned clear and warm, a perfect late spring day that found Delia rising early to prepare for her visitors. She swept the mill's worn wooden floors, arranged her meager furniture to best advantage, and spent precious hours preparing a chicken stew with vegetables from her garden and a loaf of fresh bread that filled the mill with its homey aroma. By midday, she had changed into her second-best dress, a serviceable blue cotton with only one carefully mended tear, and pinned her copper hair into a neat bun. Looking in her small mirror, Delia was startled to see color in her cheeks that hadn't been there in months. Anticipation, she told herself firmly. Simply the prospect of company after so much solitude. The sound of approaching horses announced her visitor's arrival just as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen. Delia stepped onto the mill's porch, shading her eyes against the sun as Owen and Harlan Murphy rode into view. "Mrs. Hayes," Harlan called in greeting, dismounting with surprising grace for such a large man. "Your directions were spot on. Found the place without a wrong turn." "I'm glad," Delia replied, coming down the steps to welcome them. "And please call me Delia." Owen dismounted more quietly, tipping his hat to her with a smile that seemed to hold genuine pleasure at seeing her again. "The roof still holding," he observed, glancing up at his handiwork. "Not a single leak, even during yesterday's shower," Delia confirmed. "You do good work, Mr. Blackwood." "Owen," he corrected gently, "if I'm to call you Delia." Harlan was already moving toward the creek side of the mill, his professional interest captured by the massive water wheel. Delia and Owen followed, watching as the blacksmith examined the broken mechanism with expert eyes. "Oak construction, iron reinforced," Harlan muttered, more to himself than to them. "Broken here and here," he pointed to the splintered sections, "but the axle's true, like you said, Owen. And the bearings." He leaned in closer, running a massive hand along the metal fittings. "They'll need oiling, but they're not worn beyond use." For the next hour, Harlan made a detailed assessment of the water wheel and the mill's grinding mechanism, taking measurements and making notes in a small leather-bound book. Delia followed along, asking questions and carefully memorizing his explanations of how the system had worked when operational. "The good news," Harlan said finally, closing his notebook, "is that it's fixable. The bad news is that it'll take specialized parts, time, and a fair bit of coin." Delia nodded, having expected as much. "How much coin, approximately?" Harlan named a figure that made her heart sink, though she kept her expression neutral. It was more than she had, certainly, but not so astronomical that she couldn't potentially save for it over time. "Thank you for your honesty," she said. "I'll need to consider my options." "No rush," Harlan replied kindly. "When you're ready, you know where to find me." While Harlan had been examining the water wheel, Owen had made his own circuit of the mill, checking his roof repairs and noting other maintenance issues. As they walked back toward the main building, he fell into step beside Delia. "The exterior siding on the north wall is coming loose," he observed, "and there are some foundation stones that need repointing before winter, but overall the structure's sound." "You have a builder's eye," Delia remarked. Owen shrugged modestly. "Just experience." "I've built everything from lined shacks to proper houses in my time." Inside, Delia served the meal she'd prepared, and the conversation flowed easily among the three of them. Harlan shared stories of his years as a ship's blacksmith before coming west, while Owen spoke of his travels throughout the territory. Delia found herself laughing more than she had in months, the mill's kitchen warmer and more welcoming with their presence. As the afternoon waned, Harlan announced he needed to start back to town before dark. "Sunday's my only day away from the forge," he explained, "and I promised the widow Jensen I'd look at her stove damper first thing tomorrow." After he'd ridden away, Delia expected Owen to follow suit. Instead, he lingered, offering to help her clear away the remains of their meal. "You don't need to do that," she protested as he gathered plates. "I don't mind," he replied simply. "Besides, there's something I wanted to discuss with you." Curious, Delia waited until they had finished washing the dishes before asking, "What did you want to discuss?" Owen leaned against the edge of her table, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about your mill and what it would take to make it operational again." "A small fortune, apparently," Delia said ruefully. "Not necessarily," Owen countered. "Harlan's quote assumes hiring labor for everything, but what if you had help? Someone with the skills to do much of the work, reducing the cost to mainly materials." Delia stared at him, not quite comprehending his meaning. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting a partnership of sorts, Owen said, meeting her gaze directly. I have carpentry and mechanical skills, you have the property and the vision. I help you restore the mill to working order, and in exchange, I receive a percentage of its earnings once it's operational. Delia blinked, stunned by the proposal. But your work in Pine Ridge is temporary at best, Owen finished. Harlan only needs help until his nephew arrives from Denver next month. After that, I'd be moving on anyway, looking for the next job. He gestured to the mill around them. This is a project worth investing in. The location is excellent, with good water flow year-round. Once word spreads that the mill is working again, you'd have farmers from miles around bringing their grain. It could take months to complete, Delia pointed out. Where would you stay? I've got a good tent, Owen replied with a hint of a smile. I could set up near the creek. I've slept in far worse conditions. Delia's mind raced with the implications of his offer. Having skilled help would transform her tentative dream into a genuine possibility, but it would also mean sharing her solitude, her independence. I need to think about this, she said finally. It's not a decision to make hastily. Owen nodded, respecting her caution. Of course, I'll be in Pine Ridge for at least 3 more weeks. Take your time. As he prepared to leave, gathering his hat and gloves, Owen paused at the door. Whatever you decide, I meant what I said about this place. It has potential, Delia, real potential. After he'd gone, Delia stood in the doorway of the mill, watching the dust settle on the road where he'd ridden away. The prospect he'd offered hovered in her mind like a tantalizing mirage the mill restored, the water wheel turning, grain being ground again as it had been meant to do. Could she trust him? Owen Blackwood was still largely a stranger, for all that he'd helped with her roof and shown nothing but respect during their interactions. Taking him as a partner, even a temporary one, would mean allowing someone into the independent life she'd carved out for herself. Yet as she turned back to the empty mill, Delia couldn't deny the appeal of his proposal. Alone, the restoration would take years she might not have, financially speaking. With Owen's help, it could become reality within months. For the next week, Delia mulled over the decision, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. She made another trip to Pine Ridge, ostensibly for supplies, but also to discreetly inquire about Owen Blackwood's reputation. The general store owner, Mrs. Abernathy, spoke highly of him. Honest as the day is long, the older woman assured her, pays his debts promptly and has helped half the businesses in town with repairs. My Albert says he's the most capable pair of hands to pass through Pine Ridge in years. Similar sentiments were echoed by others, including the saloon keeper and the town's lone doctor, who mentioned Owen had helped set a broken wagon axle for a family stranded outside town, refusing payment for his labor. Armed with these reassurances, Delia made her decision. 10 days after Owen's proposal, she rode into Pine Ridge specifically to find him. She located him at the livery, his sleeves rolled up as he helped Harlan shape a piece of red-hot iron. When he spotted her, Owen set down his hammer and crossed to where she waited by the wide doors, wiping sweat from his brow. Delia, he greeted her, genuine pleasure in his voice. This is a welcome surprise. I've considered your proposal, she said without preamble. I'd like to accept with some conditions. Owen's eyebrows rose. Name them. First, we put the agreement in writing terms, percentages, duration. Second, you don't stay in a tent. There's a small storage room off the main floor of the mill that could be converted to sleeping quarters. It would be more practical, especially once the weather turns. Owen considered her conditions, then nodded. Both reasonable. Any others? Delia took a deep breath. Just one. This remains my property, my home. I make the final decisions about the mill's operation and future. Of course, Owen agreed immediately. I'm offering skills and labor, not looking to take over. The mill is yours, Delia. I'm just helping bring it back to life. Relief washed through her. Then we have an agreement. They shook hands, the contact brief but somehow significant, sealing a partnership that would bind their fates together in ways neither could yet imagine. The following Sunday, Owen Blackwood arrived at the mill with his horse laden with personal belongings and a small cart borrowed from the livery, filled with tools and building materials. Delia had spent the intervening days preparing the storage room, clearing out accumulated debris and giving it a thorough cleaning. It was small but would be comfortable enough with the addition of a bed and simple furnishings. "Welcome to your new home," she said as Owen unloaded his possessions. "At least for the duration of our project." Owen surveyed the mill with fresh eyes, already mentally cataloging the tasks ahead. "I've drawn up some plans," he said, pulling a rolled paper from his saddlebag. "Thought we might start with reinforcing the foundation and that north wall before tackling the water wheel." They spread the plans on Delia's table, heads bent together as Owen explained his approach. His drawings were detailed and professional, showing a systematic restoration that would address the most critical structural issues before moving on to the mill's operational components. "You've put a lot of thought into this," Delia observed, impressed by the thoroughness of his planning. "I believe in doing things right the first time," Owen replied, "especially with a project this important." The next morning marked the beginning of their partnership in earnest. They started with the foundation, mixing mortar and repointing the loose stones that had begun to threaten the mill's structural integrity. The work was hard, physical, and dirty, but Delia insisted on working alongside Owen rather than merely assisting. By the end of that first day, her muscles ached in places she hadn't known could feel pain, and her hands were raw despite the gloves Owen had insisted she wear. But looking at the newly secured foundation, Delia felt a sense of accomplishment that transcended the discomfort. "You're a good worker," Owen commented as they washed up for dinner. "Not many would tackle that kind of labor without complaint." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Delia replied. "Never have been. Thomas used to say I was too stubborn for my own good." Owen smiled. "Stubbornness is underrated. Out here, it's often the difference between surviving and giving up." As days turned into weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were devoted to the heaviest work, taking advantage of the cooler temperatures. Afternoons might see them working on different tasks, Owen repairing the siding, while Delia cleared debris from the mill race that would eventually channel water to the wheel. Evenings were for planning the next day's work over simple meals that gradually became less awkward as they grew accustomed to each other's company. Owen proved to be a patient teacher, showing Delia carpentry techniques and explaining the mechanics of the mill's operation in ways that built on what she already knew. For her part, Delia surprised him with her quick grasp of technical concepts and her willingness to tackle any task, no matter how challenging. "Thomas started teaching me about building things when we first came west," she explained one evening as they sat on the mill's porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. "He said a woman out here needed to know how to use tools as well as any man." "He was right," Owen agreed. "Though I've met plenty of men who couldn't drive a nail straight if their lives depended on it." Delia laughed, the sound still rare enough to catch Owen's attention. She had a beautiful laugh, rich and genuine, like everything else about her. "Thomas would have liked you," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. "He valued competence above all else." "I wish I could have met him," Owen replied quietly. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," Delia confirmed, her gaze distant with memory. "Not perfect, he had a temper, and he was too ambitious sometimes, taking risks I thought unnecessary. But he was kind, and he loved this country." She gestured to the wild landscape around them. "He saw possibilities where others saw only hardship." "Like you do," Owen observed, "with this mill." Delia considered this. "I suppose so, though I'm more practical than Thomas was. He would have had this place running in half the time, but possibly with twice the problems later on." Owen chuckled. "There's wisdom in your approach. Building something to last takes time." As May gave way to June, the mill's transformation became increasingly visible. The exterior was now sound, with new siding where needed and a thoroughly repaired roof that would withstand the summer thunderstorms. Inside, they had cleared decades of accumulated debris from the grinding mechanism, replacing worn parts and carefully restoring others. The most challenging aspect remained the water wheel itself. True to his word, Owen had negotiated with Harlan for the specialized metal parts they would need, securing a significant discount by offering to do much of the preparation work himself. Still, the cost represented most of Delia's remaining savings. "It's worth it," she assured Owen when he expressed concern about the expense. "Without the water wheel, everything else is just a building." They worked side by side to prepare the wheel's broken sections for repair, carefully removing the damaged wood while preserving the original structure as much as possible. It was during this work that Delia began to notice a change in her awareness of Owen, a heightened consciousness of his proximity, the timbre of his voice, the way sunlight caught in his hair when he worked without his hat. One afternoon, as they manipulated a particularly unwieldy section of the wheel into position, Delia lost her footing on the slippery bank. Owen reacted instantly, one strong arm catching her around the waist before she could fall into the creek. For a breathless moment, she found herself pressed against him, close enough to feel the steady beat of his heart. "Careful," he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. "That water's still cold from the mountain runoff." Delia stepped back, flustered by her reaction to his touch. "Thank you. I should have worn the boots with better tread." If Owen noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign, returning to the task at hand with his usual focus. But Delia found her concentration shattered for the remainder of the day, her thoughts returning again and again to that moment of unexpected intimacy. That night, lying in her bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Delia confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was developing feelings for Owen Blackwood. Feelings that went beyond gratitude for his help or appreciation of his skills. Feelings that both thrilled and terrified her. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Thomas had been gone less than a year, and Owen was essentially her employee despite the partnership arrangement. When the mill was restored, he would move on to his next job, his next adventure. Men like him didn't put down roots. Yet despite these rational arguments, Delia found herself increasingly aware of Owen's presence in her daily life, the sound of his footsteps in the mill, his deep voice calling her name, the way his smile could brighten the most exhausting day. What she couldn't know, was that Owen was experiencing a similar internal struggle. From his perspective, Delia Hayes was remarkable not just for her determination and courage in taking on the mill single-handedly, but for the quiet strength that informed everything she did. He admired her resilience, her intelligence, her willingness to work alongside him without complaint. And increasingly, he found himself inventing reasons to be near her, to prolong their conversations, to coax the rare and wonderful sound of her laughter. But Owen was acutely aware of her vulnerability, a widow alone, still grieving, dependent on his skills to realize her dream for the mill. Taking advantage of that situation was unthinkable to a man with his sense of honor. So they continued their work, each carefully maintaining the boundaries of their professional partnership, while privately navigating emotions neither had anticipated. By early July, the water wheel restoration had progressed to the point where Harlan was ready to install the metal components that would allow it to function again. The blacksmith arrived with his wagon loaded with custom-forged parts, and the three of them spent an intense day fitting the new pieces to the restored wooden structure. "Moment of truth," Harlan announced late in the afternoon as they prepared to test the wheel for the first time. Owen and Delia had spent the previous week clearing the mill race and repairing the sluice gate that would control water flow to the wheel. Owen positioned himself near the gate, ready to open it gradually. Delia stood with Harlan near the wheel, her heart pounding with anticipation. At Owen's signal, Harlan nodded, and Owen began to raise the gate. Water rushed through the channel, striking the paddles of the wheel with increasing force. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of wood and metal that had been silent for too long, the massive wheel began to turn. "It's working," Delia exclaimed, clasping her hands together in excitement. "Owen, it's actually working." Owen joined them, his face alight with the same joy that Delia felt. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug. Owen stiffened in surprise, then returned the embrace, his arms strong and secure around her. "Congratulations," he said softly, close to her ear. "You're officially a mill owner now." Delia stepped back, suddenly aware of Harlan's amused presence. "We all did it," she corrected, including the blacksmith in her smile. "I couldn't have managed without either of you." "Don't sell yourself short," Harlan replied, grinning. "Takes vision to see what this place could be again." "You had that from the start." They spent another hour adjusting the wheel's operation, ensuring it turned smoothly and testing the connections to the interior grinding mechanism. By the time Harlan departed for town, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the mill yard. Delia and Owen stood side by side, watching the water wheel's hypnotic rotation, listening to the soothing sound of water splashing through the paddles. "I can hardly believe it," Delia said softly. "When I bought this place, everyone said I was throwing good money after bad. That it would never work again. Yet here we are," Owen replied, his voice warm with satisfaction. "Here we are," Delia echoed, acutely aware of his presence beside her, of how natural it felt to share this moment of triumph with him. "We should celebrate. I've been saving a bottle of Whiskey Thomas brought back from Denver. Tonight seems like the right occasion." Inside, Delia retrieved the bottle from its hiding place in the back of a cupboard, along with two mismatched glasses. Owen built up the fire in the stove to ward off the evening chill, and they sat at her small table, the amber liquid glowing in the lamplight. "To the Clearwater Mill," Owen proposed, raising his glass. "May it grind for another 100 years." "To partnerships," Delia countered, meeting his gaze over the rim of her glass. "And to new beginnings." The whiskey was smoother than Delia expected, warming her from within as they talked late into the evening. With the day's success loosening their usual reserve, the conversation flowed easily, touching on hopes and dreams they had rarely articulated before. "What will you do when the mill is fully operational?" Owen asked, refilling their glasses with a conservative hand. Delia considered the question. "Operate it, of course, build a reputation for quality. Perhaps expand eventually. This valley could support a small sawmill operation as well, using the same water power." "You think big," Owen observed with approval. "I like that about you." "And you?" Delia asked, suddenly needing to know. "What will you do when our work here is finished?" Owen was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he gazed into his glass. "I haven't decided," he said finally. "There's always work for someone with my skills. Pine Ridge is growing, the railroad's pushing farther west every year." "You could stay in the area," Delia suggested, trying to keep her tone casual. "Pine Ridge could use a good carpenter." "I could," Owen agreed, his blue eyes lifting to meet hers. Something in his gaze made Delia's heart beat faster. "If I had sufficient reason." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Delia found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Owen's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. The moment was shattered by a sudden gust of wind that blew the door open, sending papers flying from the table. Both jumped to their feet, the spell broken as they scrambled to gather the scattered documents. "Storm coming," Owen observed, securing the door after checking the sky outside. "Those clouds moved in fast." Delia nodded, grateful for the distraction that allowed her to regain her composure. "At least we don't have to worry about the roof anymore." They said their goodnights soon after, each retreating to their separate quarters with thoughts they weren't ready to share. The following week brought new challenges as they focused on the interior grinding mechanism. This was the heart of the mill's operation, the complex system of gears, shafts, and stones that would transform grain into flour. Much of the original equipment was intact, but needed thorough cleaning and adjustment after years of disuse. Working in close quarters on these detailed tasks, Delia and Owen found it increasingly difficult to maintain the professional distance they'd established. Their hands would brush as they passed tools, their bodies would press close in the confined spaces between machinery. Each contact seemed charged with awareness neither could fully ignore. One afternoon, as they worked to align one of the massive grinding stones, Owen paused to watch Delia calculate measurements with careful precision. "You have a natural talent for this," he observed. "Most people wouldn't grasp these mechanical concepts so quickly." Delia looked up, pleased by the compliment. "I've always been good with puzzles. My father used to say my mind worked like a clock, all interconnected gears." "Your father sounds like a perceptive man." "He was," Delia agreed, a hint of sadness in her voice. "He died when I was 16, influenza." "My mother followed 6 months later." Owen's expression softened with sympathy. "So you're no stranger to loss." "Few people are out here," Delia replied pragmatically. "But each one shapes you differently." She hesitated, then added, "Losing my parents taught me self-reliance, losing Thomas. That taught me how quickly everything can change, how important it is to build something that lasts." "Like this mill," Owen said, understanding in his eyes. "Like this mill," Delia confirmed. "When I'm gone someday, it will still be here, still serving a purpose. That matters to me." Owen nodded, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. It should matter. Not everyone thinks beyond their own lifetime. The moment stretched between them, filled with something Delia couldn't quite name, recognition, perhaps, of a shared value that transcended their immediate circumstances. Finally, Owen broke the silence, returning to the technical task at hand. But something had shifted between them, a deepening of understanding that would color their interactions in the days to come. As July progressed, news of the mill's restoration spread throughout the valley. Farmers began to stop by, curious about when they might be able to bring their grain for grinding. Each visitor marveled at the transformation, offering encouragement and sometimes practical assistance. The Pattersons, whose farm lay 3 miles downstream, arrived one Saturday with a wagon loaded with freshly harvested vegetables and a smoked ham, just a neighborly gift, Mrs. Patterson insisted, though Delia recognized it for what it was. An investment in a service they hoped to use soon. Mr. Jensen from the sawmill in Pine Ridge brought oddments of lumber that might prove useful, refusing payment with a gruff, "Consider it advertising. You'll send folks my way when they need building done, won't you, even Mrs. Abernathy from the general store made the journey, ostensibly to deliver special ordered parts, but clearly curious about the partnership everyone in town was discussing. Her shrewd eyes missed nothing as she observed Delia and Owen working together, their movements synchronized by weeks of shared labor. "You two make a good team," she commented to Delia, while Owen was occupied with unloading her wagon. "Reminds me of my Albert and me when we first started the store." Complementary skills, that's what makes a partnership work. Delia flushed, aware of the unspoken implication. "It's a business arrangement, Mrs. Abernathy. Owen has the skills I need to restore the mill." The older woman's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "If you say so, dear. But I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching. That's not just professional respect." Before Delia could formulate a response, Owen returned, and Mrs. Abernathy changed the subject smoothly to the upcoming Founders' Day celebration in Pine Ridge. "You should both come," she urged. "The whole valley turns out, dancing, food, a proper social occasion. Do you good to take a day away from all this work." Owen glanced at Delia, leaving the decision to her. "It might be nice," she admitted, We've made enough progress to afford a day off." "Then it's settled, Mrs. Abernathy declared triumphantly. "Saturday next. Wear something pretty, Delia. There's not enough opportunities for that out here." After the storekeeper had departed, Delia found herself contemplating the prospect of attending a social event, her first since Thomas's death. The idea was both appealing and intimidating. She had avoided such gatherings, uncomfortable with the pitying looks and well-meaning but painful questions about her loss. "We don't have to go if you'd rather not," Owen said that evening, perceptive as always. "I know these community events can be overwhelming," Delia suggested with a small smile. "They can be. But Mrs. Abernathy is right, we've earned a day of celebration, and it would be good to strengthen connections with the community. They'll be our customers soon." Owen nodded, practical as always. "True enough. And I hear Jensen's eldest boy plays a fine fiddle. Been a while since I've heard good music." "Do you dance, Mr. Blackwood?" Delia asked impulsively, a teasing note in her voice. Owen's slow smile made her heart skip. "I've been known to, Mrs. Hayes, when properly motivated." The week leading up to the Founders' Day celebration saw them working with renewed energy, determined to complete several key projects before allowing themselves the luxury of a day's leisure. By Friday evening, the mill's grinding stones were properly set and balanced. The gearing system was fully operational, and they had successfully run a test batch of grain through the entire process, producing coarse but usable flour. "We're nearly there," Owen observed as they surveyed their progress. "Another 2 weeks, maybe 3, and you'll be ready to open for business." The prospect was both exhilarating and sobering for Delia. Success meant the fulfillment of her dream for the mill, but it also meant the end of her partnership with Owen. Soon, he would have fulfilled his part of their agreement, free to move on to whatever opportunity next presented itself. Unless a small voice whispered in her mind, unless he had reason to stay, Saturday dawned bright and clear, a perfect summer day for an outdoor celebration. Delia rose early, taking extra care with her appearance. From the trunk where she kept her few treasured possessions, she removed a dress she hadn't worn since before Thomas's death, a soft green cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It had been her best dress when they'd lived in town, reserved for church services and special occasions. When she emerged from her room, the dress complemented by a simple pendant necklace that had been her mother's, she found Owen waiting in the kitchen. He had clearly made his own efforts for the occasion, wearing a clean white shirt with a brown vest and his best denim pants, his usually unruly hair neatly combed. His expression, when he saw her, made the extra effort worthwhile. "You look beautiful, Delia," he said simply, the directness of his gaze leaving no doubt of his sincerity. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself." They rode to Pine Ridge together in Delia's wagon, the summer morning alive with the scent of wildflowers and the songs of meadowlarks. The town came into view just before midday, already bustling with activity as people arrived from outlying farms and ranches. The main street had been transformed for the celebration, with colorful bunting stretched between buildings and trestle tables set up for the community feast. A wooden platform had been erected at one end of the street for dancing, where several men were tuning instruments. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Abernathy called, waving them over to where she stood with a group of townspeople. "Come meet everyone properly. Some folks here are mighty interested in your mill's progress." The next hour passed in a whirl of introductions and conversations about the mill's restoration. Delia found herself the center of attention in a way she hadn't experienced since arriving in the valley, not as an object of pity, but as a businesswoman whose venture promised to benefit the entire community. Owen stayed close by her side, deferring technical questions to her expertise when appropriate, but offering his own insights on the restoration process. They functioned as a team, Delia realized, complementing each other's knowledge in a way that impressed their listeners. You two have accomplished more in a few months than most would in a year, observed Mr. Peterson, who owned the largest wheat farm in the valley. When do you expect to be operational for customers? Mid-August, if all continues as planned, Delia replied. Just in time for the main harvest. We'll be first in line, Peterson assured her. Been hauling our grain 20 miles to the Riverdale mill. Having one right here in the valley will be a godsend. As the afternoon progressed, the celebration grew livelier. After a community feast that showcased the bounty of the valley's farms, the musicians took their places on the platform, and dancing began. Delia watched from the sidelines as couples took to the floor, the fiddle's lively tune setting toes tapping. May I have this dance? Owen's voice at her elbow startled her from her observations. He stood with his hand extended, a question in his eyes. Delia hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. I should warn you, it's been a while since I've danced, she said as he led her toward the platform. Like riding a horse, Owen replied with a smile. Your body remembers even if your mind forgets. He was right. As they joined the circle of dancers, the familiar patterns came back to Delia, the steps, the turns, the rhythm of movement that had once been a regular part of community life. Owen proved to be an excellent partner, his natural grace belying his powerful build, his hand at her waist providing gentle guidance when needed. As the afternoon wore on, they danced several more times, alternating lively reels with slower waltzes that brought them into closer proximity. During one such dance, Owen's arm around her waist, his cheek nearly touching her hair, Delia found herself wishing the music would never end. You're a natural, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. I think Mrs. Abernathy was right, you needed this day away from work. We both did, Delia replied, acutely aware of his nearness, the clean scent of soap and sun-warmed skin. Though I'm surprised to admit it. Owen chuckled, the sound reverberating through his chest where her hand rested. Stubbornness again. It's hard to step away from something that matters as much as the mill does to you. To us, Delia corrected before she could reconsider. It matters to us both, doesn't it? Owen's steps faltered almost imperceptibly before he recovered the rhythm. Yes, he agreed, his voice deeper than before. It does. The moment hung between them, weighted with significance neither was quite ready to articulate. Then the music ended and they separated, rejoining the social whirl of the celebration. As evening approached, lanterns were lit along the street, casting a warm glow over the continuing festivities. Delia found herself drawn into conversation with a group of women, discussing everything from preserving techniques to the latest news from the territorial capital. Your mill partner is quite the catch, Mrs. Jensen observed when the conversation turned to local eligible bachelors. Half the single ladies here have been casting eyes his way all afternoon. Delia glanced across the gathering to where Owen stood talking with several of the valley's farmers, his tall figure easy to distinguish in the crowd. Mr. Blackwood is very skilled, she replied neutrally. I've been fortunate to have his expertise for the restoration, Mrs. Jensen exchanged knowing looks with the other women. Skills are all well and good, dear, but that's not what has Jessie Peterson batting her eyelashes at him right now. Following her gaze, Delia saw the wheat farmer's daughter, a pretty blonde of about 20, engaging Owen in animated conversation, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that was unmistakably flirtatious. An unexpected surge of jealousy took Delia by surprise. She had no claim on Owen beyond their business partnership. He was free to court whomever he wished. Yet the sight of Jessie's obvious interest unsettled her in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Excuse me," she murmured to the women, suddenly needing some distance from both the conversation and the scene across the street. "I should check on our wagon before it gets too dark." Delia made her way through the crowd toward the edge of town where they had left the wagon. The evening air was cooler away from the press of bodies, and she took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Her reaction to seeing Owen with Jessie Peterson was irrational, she told herself firmly. Childish even. Delia, Owen's voice behind her made her start. Everything all right? She turned to find him standing a few paces away, concern evident in his expression. Fine, she replied too quickly. Just checking on the wagon. It's getting late and we have a drive ahead of us. Owen studied her face in the fading light. You're ready to leave, Delia hesitated. The celebration would continue well into the night, with more dancing and socializing. But suddenly she felt out of place, her earlier enjoyment replaced by a confusion of emotions she wasn't prepared to examine. If you'd like to stay longer, I can drive back alone, she offered. I'm sure you could find a ride back to the mill tomorrow. I came with you, I'll leave with you, Owen said simply. Unless you'd prefer to be alone, the question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Delia considered it, then shook her head. No, I wouldn't prefer that. They made their farewells, accepting invitations to return for the harvest festival in autumn and promises from several farmers to bring their grain to the mill as soon as it was operational. As they drove away from the lights and music of Pine Ridge, a comfortable silence settled between them. The night was clear, stars emerging in a velvet sky as they followed the familiar road toward the mill. Delia found her earlier confusion giving way to a strange contentment, as if something had been resolved without words. I enjoyed today, Owen said finally, his voice quiet in the darkness. Seeing you enjoy yourself, being part of the community, it reminded me of what I've been missing, moving from job to job. Delia glanced at him, his profile illuminated by starlight. Have you ever considered settling somewhere permanently? She asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider. Owen was silent for a long moment. I've considered it, he said finally. More recently than ever before. The implications of his words hung in the air between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Delia kept her eyes on the road ahead, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. The right place would need to offer more than just work, Owen continued, his voice thoughtful. It would need to feel like home, like somewhere I belonged. And have you found such a place? Delia asked, hardly daring to breathe. Owen turned to look at her, his gaze intense even in the darkness. I believe I might have, Delia, but finding a place is only part of the equation. Before she could respond, the mill came into view, its silhouette familiar and welcoming against the night sky. Owen jumped down to open the gate that led to the yard, then climbed back beside her for the final approach. As they prepared the horse and wagon for the night, their movements were synchronized by weeks of working together, requiring few words. Inside the mill, Delia lit the lamps while Owen stoked the stove to take the chill from the evening air. Would you like some tea? Delia offered, unwilling to end the evening just yet. I would, Owen replied, removing his vest and draping it over a chair back. It was a good day, but a long one. They sat at the kitchen table with steaming cups, the familiar surroundings somehow changed by the day's experiences. Delia found herself studying Owen's face in the lamplight, noting the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the strong line of his jaw now shadowed with evening stubble. What? He asked, catching her gaze. I was just thinking, Delia said slowly, about what you said on the drive home. About finding the right place to settle. Owen set down his cup, his full attention on her face, and I was wondering, she continued, gathering her courage, if the mill could be such a place. For you. The question hung between them, fraught with meaning that went far beyond the simple words. Owen's expression grew serious, his blue eyes never leaving hers. The mill itself isn't what would keep me here, Delia, he said finally, his voice low and intent. It's the woman who had the courage to see its potential when everyone else saw only ruin. The woman who works alongside me without complaint, who has more determination in her little finger than most men have in their entire bodies. Delia's breath caught in her throat. Owen, let me finish, he said gently. I came here for a job, for a partnership that made good business sense. I didn't expect to find someone who would make me question everything about the life I've been living. Someone who would make me want to build something lasting, not just with my hands but with my heart. He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. I'm falling in love with you, Delia Hayes, have been for weeks now. And if there's any chance you might feel something similar, then yes, the mill could be exactly the place I've been looking for. Delia stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. The words she wanted to say seemed stuck in her throat, tangled with fears and doubts. It's too soon, she whispered finally. Thomas has been gone less than a year. I never expected to feel this way about anyone else, ever. Owen's hand remained on hers, warm and steady. I know, and I would never rush you or ask you to dishonor his memory. But I also know that life is unpredictable and sometimes brutally short. When you find something worth holding on to, you have to be brave enough to reach for it. I'm afraid, Delia admitted, the simple truth finally emerging. Not of my feelings for you, those are clearer than I want to admit. I'm afraid of losing again, of being left alone. Understanding softened Owen's expression. No one can promise forever, Delia, not in this life, but I can promise to stay as long as I have breath in my body, to build something with you that will outlast us both, just like this mill. Tears blurred Delia's vision, but they were not tears of sadness. They were the release of months of loneliness, of struggling alone, of denying herself the possibility of a second chance. I think I've been falling in love with you since you fixed my roof before I even asked, she said, a watery smile breaking through her tears. I just didn't want to admit it, even to myself. Owen's answering smile was like sunrise after the longest night. He rose from his chair, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. Delia went willingly, the rightness of his embrace undeniable as she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. We don't have to rush anything, Owen murmured into her hair. We have time to do this properly. Delia leaned back to look up at him, finding certainty where there had been only questions before. We do, she agreed, but I don't want to waste a moment of it pretending I don't know what I want. She rose on tiptoe, her hand resting against his cheek as she brought her lips to his in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with shared longing. Owen's arms tightened around her, pulling her closer as years of solitude and months of unacknowledged attraction crystallized into this single perfect moment of connection. When they finally parted, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I should probably mention, he said with a hint of humor in his voice, that I've been planning to ask if I could court you properly after the mill was finished, had a whole speech prepared. Delia laughed softly. I'd still like to hear it sometime. You will, he promised. Along with a great many other things I've been wanting to tell you. They remained in each other's arms, the night stretching before them with new possibilities, the mill around them solid and enduring, a testament to what could be built with vision, hard work, and the courage to begin again. The final weeks of summer passed in a blur of activity, as Delia and Owen worked to complete the mill's restoration while navigating the tender beginnings of their relationship. By day, they continued their labors side by side, now with an added dimension of awareness that made even the most mundane tasks seem somehow significant. Evenings became precious time for conversation, for learning each other's stories in greater depth, for the sweet discovery of shared affection expressed in glances and touches that grew increasingly confident. True to his word, Owen had formally asked to court Delia, presenting her with a hand-carved wooden box he had been working on in secret moments, a beautiful piece crafted from cherry wood, with intricate patterns that echoed the mill's waterwheel design. It's beautiful, Delia had breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. When did you find time to make this? I have my ways, Owen had replied with a smile, and good reason to make the effort. August brought the first official customers to Clearwater Mill. Mr. Peterson arrived with his sons, and a wagon loaded with the early wheat harvest, eager to be the first to use the newly restored facility. The grinding stones turned perfectly, powered by the water wheel that now rotated with smooth precision in the creek. When the first sacks of flour were loaded back onto the Peterson wagon, Delia felt a sense of accomplishment, unlike anything she had experienced before. This was what she and Thomas had dreamed of, creating something of value, something that would serve the community while providing a livelihood they could be proud of. The only shadow on her happiness was the knowledge that Thomas wasn't there to see it. Yet as she watched Owen explain the milling process to Peterson's youngest son, his patience and enthusiasm evident in every gesture, Delia felt a certainty that Thomas would have approved. Not just of the mill's success, but of the man who had helped make it possible. Word spread quickly, and soon farmers from throughout the valley were bringing their grain to Clearwater Mill. Owen had designed an efficient system for managing the flow of customers, and Delia kept meticulous records of each transaction. By the end of August, the mill was turning a modest profit, with promises of more business as the main harvest season approached. "We need to hire help," Owen observed one evening as they reviewed the account books. "The two of us can't manage the volume once harvest is in full swing." "The Jensen boy is looking for work," Delia suggested. "He's young but strong and eager to learn." Owen nodded approvingly. "Good choice. And we should consider building a proper storage barn before winter. The current shed won't accommodate the inventory we'll need to maintain." Delia looked up from the ledger, struck by his use of "we" and the way he spoke of future plans with such certainty. "You're thinking quite far ahead," she observed. Owen met her gaze steadily. "I am. Is that a problem?" "Not a problem," Delia replied, her heart warming at the implication. "Just reassuring." His smile held promise. "Good, because I have a great many plans that involve you, this mill, and our future together. Our future together." The words echoed in Delia's mind, filling her with a happiness she had thought lost forever after Thomas's death. She had built a new life from the ruins of her old one, found strength she hadn't known she possessed, and opened her heart to possibilities she had never anticipated. As summer gave way to autumn, the valley blazed with color, aspen trees turning gold against the dark green of pines, the creek reflecting a sky that seemed impossibly blue. The mill operated at full capacity during harvest season, with Owen training young Robert Jensen to assist with the mechanical aspects while Delia managed the business transactions. Their partnership, both professional and personal, deepened with each passing day. Owen had gradually moved his few possessions from the storage room to Delia's quarters, their relationship progressing naturally to greater intimacy as their commitment to each other solidified. One crisp October morning, as they walked along the creek discussing plans for winterizing the mill, Owen stopped beneath a towering cottonwood tree whose leaves shimmered gold in the sunlight. "This seems like the right place," he said, his expression suddenly serious. "For what?" Delia asked, confused by the abrupt change in his demeanor. Owen took both her hands in his. "For asking the most important question of my life." Delia's heart skipped as understanding dawned. "Owen, Delia Hayes," he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I came to your mill as a drifter, a man with skills but no real place in the world. You gave me not just work but purpose. Not just shelter but a home, not just companionship but love." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that caught the sunlight, a ring, simple but beautifully crafted, with a small pearl set in silver. "I'm asking you to be my wife," Owen said, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "To build a life together that's as solid and enduring as the mill we've restored. To face whatever comes, good harvests and bad, abundance and hardship side by side." Tears blurred Delia's vision, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Owen Blackwood. I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I had this made in Pine Ridge," he explained. "The silver is from my old mining claim, the one good thing that came from those years of searching." The pearl reminded me of you, something beautiful created through adversity. Delia examined the ring, touched by the thoughtfulness behind it. It's perfect, she said, looking up at the man who had restored not just her mill but her belief in second chances. Absolutely perfect. They were married on Thanksgiving Day in a ceremony at the mill itself, transformed for the occasion with autumn flowers and boughs of pine. The entire valley turned out to celebrate. The community that had initially viewed Delia's purchase of the abandoned mill with skepticism, now gathering to witness the union of the couple whose partnership had revitalized not just a building, but an essential service for the region. "Never seen a more fitting match," Harlan declared during the celebration that followed, raising a glass to the newlyweds. Blackwood fixed the roof before she even asked, and Mrs. Hayes begged pardon. Mrs. Blackwood now was smart enough to recognize a good man when she saw one. "To the Blackwoods," called Mrs. Abernathy, "and to Clearwater Mill. May they both stand strong for generations to come." The toast was echoed by everyone present, the goodwill of the community surrounding Delia and Owen like a tangible blessing. Later, as evening fell and the last guests departed, Owen led Delia to the mill's porch, where they stood together looking out over their property, the creek reflecting the first stars of evening, the water wheel turning steadily, the lights of the mill glowing golden against the gathering darkness. "Happy?" Owen asked, his arm around her waist drawing her close against his side. Delia leaned her head against his shoulder, the simple gold band on her finger catching the lamplight from inside. "More than I ever thought possible again," she admitted. "When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over, that the best I could hope for was independence and meaningful work. And now," Owen prompted gently. "Now I have those things still," Delia replied, turning in his arms to face him, "but I also have you. A partner in every sense of the word, someone who sees me clearly and loves me anyway, someone who fixed my roof before I even asked, because that's the kind of man you are." Owen's kiss was tender, a promise renewed. "And you're the kind of woman who saw potential in an abandoned mill and in a drifting cowboy with calloused hands and not much to his name." "We make a good team," Delia said, echoing Mrs. Abernathy's observation from months before. "The best," Owen agreed, gathering her closer as the stars emerged one by one above their mill, their home, their shared future stretching before them like the vast Montana sky boundless with possibility. Spring came early the following year, the creek swollen with snowmelt from the mountains, the valley greening with new life. Clearwater Mill had prospered through the winter, establishing itself as an essential part of the community. Owen had expanded their operations to include a small sawmill operation that complemented the grain processing, while Delia had developed a thriving trade in specialty flowers that were shipped as far as Denver. On a perfect May morning, as dawn broke over the eastern hills, Delia gave birth to their first child, a daughter with her mother's copper hair and her father's clear blue eyes. They named her Hope for what she represented to them both, the fulfillment of dreams neither had dared to hold after paths marked by loss and wandering. As Owen held his daughter for the first time, standing by the window of their bedroom while Delia rested, he looked out at the mill where their story had begun, the abandoned building that had become the foundation of their shared life. "Your mother is the bravest woman I've ever known," he whispered to the sleeping infant. "She bought this mill when everyone told her it was a mistake. She let me fix her roof when she barely knew me. And then she fixed something in me that I didn't even know was broken." From the bed, Delia watched them, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "Are you filling our daughter's head with stories already?" she asked, her voice tired but content. Owen turned, his expression one of such tender love that it brought tears to Delia's eyes. "Just telling her where she comes from," he replied, crossing to sit beside his wife on the bed, their daughter cradled between them. "A place built on courage, hard work, and second chances. And love," Delia added softly, "most of all love." Most of all, love, Owen agreed, leaning down to kiss her with reverence. The strongest foundation of all. Outside, the water wheel turned steadily, powered by the creek's constant flow, grinding grain into flour just as it had been designed to do generations before. Inside, a family that had begun with a leaking roof, and an unexpected visitor continued to grow, to build, to thrive, creating their own legacy in a mill that had been abandoned but never forgotten. A place restored by skilled hands and hopeful hearts, a home where love had found its way through storm and sunshine alike. And in the years to come, when travelers passed by Clearwater Mill, they would see a thriving operation, a prosperous homestead, a family working side by side, and they would hear the story of the widow who had lived in an abandoned mill, and the cowboy who had fixed her roof before she even asked.